Hello everyone, welcome to Phenom Philosophy. I know it's been a long time since I've posted. I've been really busy with classes and I'm actually about to graduate with my philosophy degree from Texas Christian University. In one of my classes, we're studying the intersection between religion, sex, and culture, specifically pertaining to Latin American culture. As part of a final class project, I've decided to interview one of my closest friends who is a devout Christian and is studying to be a psychologist and deal with sexual assault cases and also has the experience of being a Latin American in America. This interview took place in April, which happens to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we'll be sure to address some of these themes in the following interview. For this interview, the person that I'm interviewing is actually a sexual assault victim. So in order to preserve the victim's identity, I've decided to have them turn off their camera over the Zoom interview. I really valued my friend's insights and I can't wait to show you guys just what they have in store to tell. I'm Carlos Hidalgo and this is Phenom Philosophy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Phenom Philosophy. Today we have a special project that we're going to be engaging in. This one is definitely going to be encompassing the intersection between religion, culture, and sex. So with me today, I have a special guest, and for anonymity's sake, we're going to keep her name out of this, but she's a graduate from the Southwestern Assemblies of God University, a devout Christian, a sexual assault survivor, and most importantly, a close friend. How are you doing?
I am great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming on. Like it really means a lot. And I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about some of these experiences, whether it be like their religion or most importantly, like being a sexual assault survivor. So, I just want to commend you for coming on here. It really means a lot.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and start off by telling us about yourself, just sort of your background and where you're from.
Yeah, so I grew up originally from Chicago. My family and I have moved here to Texas about 5 years ago. My mom does Mary Kay, and so we would come and visit Texas ever since I was 12. And then eventually we loved Texas. So we moved out here, and it has been the greatest thing that we have made it as a family together. So I'm the oldest of four as well, and just graduated college. So just moving on to big things. I have a background in psychology with a minor in addictions, and I'm just trying to continue to fulfill my master's and then hopefully my PhD program in clinical psych.
That's awesome. And then your family background, your parents are originally from Guatemala, that's right?
Yes, so both my parents are from Guatemala. My dad is from a little up by the capital, close to the capital, about an hour away from there. My mom's most down by the coast. And in Guatemala, there's only one airport. So the few times that I have visited my grandparents and families and uncles over there, I've had to travel like 8 hours down the road, and it's the worst part to travel. So it's a beautiful country, but it's definitely had its hardships for sure.
No, I totally get it. I totally get it. And what brought them to Chicago of all places?
Yeah, so my dad is 4 years older than my mom. My mom, when she was 18, she got a full scholarship to in the United States, and her community college that she got accepted into was in Iowa. So that's where she landed in this part of the country. But my dad, he had family member in Los Angeles. So when he came over here looking for work, he went to live there. And then he has an aunt in Chicago in Blue Island, which Blue Island's about 10 minutes outside of Chicago. So he went over there, and through a mutual friend, that's how they came to meet here in the United States. So that's kind of their journey on there. But originally my dad's a pastor's kid and a missionary kid. So he actually lived in the town that my mom lived at. And so they knew about each other growing up, but they never actually officially met until here.
Wow, that's quite a background. That's quite a background. And then now they moved you and your family out to Texas, and you guys are down just south of the Metroplex and down near the Waxahachie area, which is where SAGU is, right? Southwestern Assemblies of God University, right?
Yeah. So when we moved to Texas, it really was by faith. It's not like we had a job lined up for them. We really only had one friend down here, which my mom met through Mary Kay, through the conventions that she would come to every year. So she met that one friend she got close to over the years. And so little by little, when we were starting to make that decision, she said, hey, I will really help you if you guys do decide to come out here. And she lives in Irving. And so she helped us through this process, and that's how we landed here in Euless whenever we moved over here. And then we found a house in Bedford. And then looking through the process of finally finding a job, my dad found a job in Waxahachie. So we moved out there, we landed in Midlothian, which is about 20 minutes from Waxahachie. And that's how we kind of established here in Texas.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so having lived now in Texas for a few years, I wanted to get on to sort of the meat of the conversation and sort of the intersections of addressing religion, culture, and sexual assault. So my first question for you is, how do you think your background as a Latina has shaped your experience studying at a mostly white Christian university like SAGU?
It was definitely a very hard transition, I would say. Back home in Chicago, we are very diverse. The population is very much Black and African American. And so we had our Hispanics, especially in the school that I grew up in, we had Hispanics, we had Black, and then of course your white people, but they're more, I would say, more progressive when it comes to looking at different topics compared to the South. So whenever I came here, I landed in a very diverse high school as well, which was Trinity. They're super diverse. So I was like, okay, right. And that's how we met. So I'm thinking, okay, Texas is great. It's going to be very diverse, very open-minded. Love Dallas in that specific area. So when I went to a more conservative part of Texas, it was very, very hard. It was very much dominated by white people, especially at my school. The population, I would say 80-90% white. So it was hard to kind of learn their culture. I've never been surrounded by white people, so I was very exposed to other cultures and diversities before that one, and especially them being very like conservative. And I grew up Christian, so I already knew kind of how Christians think, but it was more learning, how do white people think? How do they see God? What's their perspective on how to live in part of society? So it was very hard in the beginning, but I adapt pretty quickly, and it just became a normal part after about maybe like the first year of college.
Okay. And so you would say that like you really, at first, you felt a sort of culture shock, like you really felt like a minority. And then when you moved over there, as you sort of got acclimated, do you still like feel like you're a minority over there as much so as you did like when you moved?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I moved to Midlothian in my last year of high school. I was a senior, and that was the year that Trump won as president. And so they were very much Republican, very much, hey, we're Trump supporters. And I was one out of two Hispanics in my class.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, very, very small. I think there was like one Black person and then one Asian, and that Asian was adopted by a white family. So I don't really count her, but so it was when that whole environment coming into it, and they've grown up with each other since kindergarten, just because it was such a small town. It was very much like, you are the outsider, you are the Hispanic that's coming in, and it was very, very hard. So I had to look through the lens of, how do I survive without standing out too much? I'm already standing out because of the color of my skin. So how do I blend in? And so it was very much kind of, okay, put your white hat on. How do I blend in? How do I not show my Hispanic side too much, in the sense of, do not speak Spanish in front of them. Do not mention kind of like how my parents live. And that includes like food wise, what do we eat, all of the cultural aspects that comes in that particular background. So, and I still do that today, like, especially in my white Christian college that I went to. I love the college, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely room for improvement and diversity in that aspect. So I definitely have to be aware of that one, considering it's a conservative town, but for the most part, it just becomes a cultural part of life. So you kind of get used to it in that sense.
Interesting. And you mentioned how when you moved down there, you kind of had to get into the mind of how like white Christians think. But
Mhm.
how do you think that your Hispanic culture has impacted the way that you practice your faith?
My Hispanic culture practice my faith.
And like,
Mm,
would you say that there's any sort of impact that maybe like your own culture has, or any cultural differences that you immediately notice pertaining to religion?
not necessarily. So growing up, my parents very much adapted to the white culture because they knew their own struggles of being Hispanic in this part of the country. And, 20, 30 something years ago, they weren't as developed. They were just, you're a random Hispanic probably looking for work, for a job. So when they came over here and they had kids, they said, okay, this is how you kind of have to act or in this country. You can't just be openly so proud of your heritage. And so looking back at it now, it is kind of sad just to say that, but it really did help us. The white people, you would say, accepted us because we blended in with them more than we stood out from them. So in the sense of my faith, like it seemed pretty normal to me.
Okay. No, and that makes sense, especially since like, you weren't born in Guatemala, you weren't raised like, with that background. So, you were sort of born into that culture, right?
Yeah, so when it comes to like my grandparents and my cousins and aunts and uncles, they're all in Guatemala. So it's only my immediate family that's out here. So it's only the six of us and we only had each other. And the only thing I learned from my heritage was from them and the stories that they told. And it wasn't until I grew up and I was 12, 14 years old when I went to go visit them, that's when I finally saw the first sense of my Guatemalan culture. But up to that point, I was very much Americanized, very much like, okay, white people are this sense, Black people are this. And so you kind of learn how to blend from that.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, especially as a Hispanic that's, I'm born and raised in Texas. So,
Right.
if people can't even tell from the way I talk, it's kind of weird to hear this kind of voice come from somebody with with this much of a Mexican face. So that's what I
And then your
um
name comes to mind. So yeah.
yeah, exactly. I have a very Hispanic name. So I want to sort of shift gears here and go kind of
Mhm.
into what you study. And so now I want to ask you, why did you decide to major in psychology? You're about to graduate with a degree in psychology and hopefully go into that field. What made you decide to do that?
Yeah. So, which was very, very ironic, actually. So, when I went to go visit my grandparents for the second time in Guatemala, I've only been there twice, but on the second time, I actually went over there and I stayed for 2 months. And I stayed with you would say my second uncle, I believe, or third uncle. It's my mom's uncle, so I don't know on that line. It was him and his family, and he had an older son who was 26 years old, and I was 14 at the time. And he sexually abused me while I was over there. And so, as a 14-year-old, mind you, and then kind of being alone in another country, it was definitely a very messy time. I didn't know what was going on. And because I didn't really grow up with them, they weren't family. So I didn't know who to trust. So that incident happened. I kept it as a secret. And you ask any survivor, every story is completely different. But for the most part, you're just filled with so much shame that you do not tell anyone. So when I came back, I didn't tell any of my families, but they still were so proud of them. And like they were thankful how much they took care of me over the 2 months that I was over there. So it wasn't until a whole year that I came back from that trip when my mom found out, and that was a whole different story. But in that time, my mom immediately was like, okay, this is something that we need to deal with as a family, but I think you need counseling. It was just getting to the point where they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what happened exactly. So I started seeking Christian counseling. I knew back then that my faith was very important to me, but I knew this was something that I could leave God and hate God immediately for the rest of my life. And it wasn't something that I wanted to do. So in seeking counseling, I wanted to make sure that my counselor was a Christian, and kind of going through all of that messiness and trying to figure out exactly and process what happened to me. She just really, really helped me in the therapeutics part of healing. And I knew that coming out of that session, I took therapy about a year, and she was just the most amazing person that I could have worked with during that difficult time. So from that moment on, I knew that I wanted to be that person for someone later on in life. I wanted to become a therapist. I wanted to be a Christian therapist, because you don't see a bunch of Christian therapists nowadays. You know, it's just therapy. You take kind of religion out of it. But I do think there is a beauty in practicing one's faith in the therapeutic session, especially if it benefits the client in the end. So started graduating high school, I knew I wanted to do psychology, and I just graduated. So on to the next step of fulfilling that dream.
Yeah, for sure. And congratulations on that. That's a really big step. And I know that, you said that you want to get a master's and a doctorate. So, good luck to you on every part of that journey.
Thank you.
And you had mentioned that the person that you had been, working with through the healing process was a Christian counselor. So I wanted to sort of ask you, how does your faith sort of shape how you would treat people that are survivors of sexual assault? I don't think a lot of people are familiar with this sort of notion of Christian counseling as opposed to secular counseling.
Yeah, so with secular counseling, I mentioned that, the counselor cannot be biased whatsoever. And so the counselor, no matter like what they believe, they cannot bring it into the therapy session, because the main rule for counseling is do no harm to the client. And so with sharing one's beliefs with a patient, it could definitely influence them. If the patient doesn't agree, that can just create just so much chaos in the whole process itself. And so kind of with Christian counseling, beforehand that the counselor is a Christian and that they want to use Christian values to kind of help with that. So the client knows beforehand, and if the client is a believer themselves, they want to say, okay, I want to use faith to help therapeutic session. I'm having questions about God. How can they help in that aspect? So for me, when helping survivors, and I do an internship with a program here in Texas, they're not Christians whatsoever. So I can't go and just openly say, hey, God's going to help you, or, I'm praying for you. I have to learn how to communicate with them without just using my faith. And so with Christian counseling, they're a little bit more lenient on like the ethical rules and the ethical boundaries. You can, pray with them if they so choose. So with me, when using my faith, though, I just love people. So I have no problem with kind of taking faith out of the equation and speaking to a survivor. It's so if they choose to and they ask me, I'm more than willing to do that. And that includes praying with them, giving them scripture and so forth when it comes to that practice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that, I'm really glad that your sort of education prepares you for both, right? It seems as though you can, you're able to separate the two, and if you need to engage in secular counseling, you're able to do that. And if you're, if you want to engage in Christian counseling, you're capable of doing that too. So now I want to kind of tie it back to your heritage for a second, and just ask, like, how has being a Latina shaped your experience in being in psychology and working with patients? Like I know you, so I know you're bilingual. Do you think that has a lot to do with it?
Oh yeah. So in the Hispanic community, mental illness is just not a thing. If you ask a lot of parents nowadays who are a little bit older, I would say maybe like a Hispanic who's 40 plus, mental illness is just non-existent. And so especially when it comes to like the manhood, it's like, if you are sad, toughen up and keep going. If you are a woman, it's just like, look, you have responsibilities, and it usually comes with, you're a mom, you need to put the kids first. So when it comes to a Latina, a lot of Hispanics do not come and with like very open-mindedness into therapy. It's like, this is just complete crap. I don't need therapy. I'm just gonna kind of mess it up. And usually we're starting to see a change in that culture, but it's so very, very slow. And that change is usually within the kids. And especially a lot of the kids nowadays are first generation, second generation. And so this country, we're finally seeing an awareness in general of mental health. So that's usually when they start to persuade the parents, hey, mom, I might need this. And so the parents have no idea what's going on.
Right.
So when it comes to my background, one, speaking Spanish helps a lot. It just creates a whole other door and a whole other world of comfort for them because they can speak in their native language. And when it comes to just kind of explaining what mental illness is, it definitely helps, considering it's coming from a person that that understands how they grew up, how the system works. And that comes just with so many other layers that we can continue on. But it's definitely helped me in that sense of community, especially here in Texas. We see so many Hispanics, and we see a lack of Hispanic counselors just because they don't believe in mental health as well, or they don't have the time, you know, coming into this country. A lot of the parents have committed sacrifices for their kids. So their kids want to do a well-established career, and with psychology, it does take a while. It takes, you know, 10 plus years to fully practice it. So they choose other careers that take, you know, 4 years with a bachelor's degree, and that's business, and do money, and then going forth with that. So we're definitely rare, but we're seeing very much progress in that aspect, and it's a beautiful thing once you kind of get involved in all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's definitely relevant. I think there was a statistic that I saw one time that showed that the highest demographic of that has the highest amount of suicide rates was actually Latina teenagers. And you know, it definitely makes sense that, you know, the type of counselor that they would want to get is someone that really like relates to them, right? Having that Latin American experience, as well as also, you know, being a female. So I definitely see how that coincides with that sort of statistic, and I'm glad to feel your optimism that things are getting better and more diverse in that field.
Yes.
I want to. We're again going to pivot. We're trying to hit quite a few different topics and different intersections.
Yeah, go for it.
So the next question I have is, how has being a sexual assault survivor shaped your faith? I know that some people endure either extreme periods of doubt. You know, we hear like a problem of evil scenarios where they're like, how could God let this happen? How would you say that you sort of handled your faith through that turmoil?
Well, in the beginning, it was not pretty. It's funny because my counselor at the time actually told me, do a journal and literally write down every day or whenever you feel like it, mostly how you view God. Because that was kind of like the main point, is like, I need to restore my faith somehow. And looking back on it, every single day was, I hate God. I did not want anything to do with him. And at that point in my life, I was only 14, but I felt like I had such a closeness with God. And so I was like at my peak, you can say, in the relationship. And that happened. So I was like, how dare you? How could you do this or let it happen? And you just have so many questions. And so, but I think and this is just with anything, God uses like the worst stories possible that happens to us, and he uses them for good. I can honestly say, because I got the help that I needed, I decided to pursue a field that allows me to help others. I'm graduating college, and hopefully when I can start practicing, I can help other people. And I think what brought me a lot of closure was that I found out that my sexual assaulter also was sexually assaulted when he was 7 years old by a woman. That assault was happening for months, perhaps maybe up to a year. And at 7 years old, like, I cannot even begin to imagine how he was processing that. And then he had no awareness of mental illness as well, or how to fully process through all of that. So he never healed properly from that trauma. And because of that, that resulted in him just hurting so many other people. And unfortunately, I was one of those people that he hurt. So I'm thinking, okay, I could either not heal from this the way that I want to and just kind of live life and hate God and move on and just kind of be bitter in this world, or I can learn from it and maybe use it to do some sort of good. And the God that I believe in is just, he does so many miraculous things. He's so beautiful in so many ways. And I really can just see him carrying me through this whole thing. And so during that process, my faith really did help me, even though at the time I didn't realize that it did.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if anybody else might have this going through their mind as you were telling that story. It very much sounds like a Christian movie, like what you're describing, right? How you go through this, like, you have this traumatic event, you have this sort of inner conflict, and you come to find out that your assaulter had problems of their own, and you bring out this sort of empathetic side, and you just want to do what you can to help, and you use your faith to sort of push that through, and to move through it and heal. I just think it's the makings of a great movie.
I think so too. We'll see if that comes to light one day.
Or at least a good book. I think definitely you should write that. So last question here, I guess can be a sort of call to action, but what would be your advice to those that have experienced traumatic events such as sexual assault? As I didn't mention this in the beginning, I should have, but that April is coming to a close and it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So what would be sort of your advice to those that have experienced sexual assault?
With sexual assault, as much as I can say now that I'm okay, I still suffer triggers. There's still things that, a person says or a person does that can take me back to that place. I think, and I mentioned that to you before, is that you might not remember about the incident every day, but your body does. So let's just say an incident of, a boyfriend at the time touched me and I didn't like it, or he held my hand one way, or even a random side hug, that can trigger my body remembers automatically. And then I go back to that place. So my thing is that story and that event is always going to be a scar in your life. You're never going to properly heal from that, but you can still overcome it because it's such a beautiful thing, and that you can use that as a story and as a reminder that you are a survivor, that you are stronger because of that. And then that pain that you're going to endure, it's not the end as much as it feels like it. And you can definitely overcome it, and you are stronger than you think. And just do not be afraid to just voice that, because in that time you are just so ashamed of what happened to you. You blame yourself through everything. And so just to be reminded, it's not your fault. Someone else is in pain because of that. And it's going to be okay. At the end of the day, you will be okay. And you have a whole community who is going to support you no matter what.
Thank you so much. This has been a really great interview. I hope that people that are listening get a lot out of it. These are really important topics to talk about, especially with today's political climate and all of the sort of activism we see for the Latin American community, as well as the interesting intersections between religion and sexual assault. And I just thought you were, the perfect person to address these issues, and just so articulate and having that experience. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll have you back on another time.
Yeah, I'd love to. So thank you just so much for inviting me.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.